check out our streaming schedule for this week. We've got tons of content in terms of the NFL and college football, as we're going live just about every single day this week. So make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single moment where we go live. And now, on with our feature presentation. December 28th, 1963. We head to Buffalo for what is undoubtedly, at this point in franchise history, the biggest game in the history of the Buffalo Bills. Granted, they've only been around for 4 years up until this point, as they were created alongside the foundation of the American Football League in 1960. But they were playing a playoff game, their first in franchise history, against the Boston Patriots. Much like their counterparts in the NFL, back in 1963, you had to win your division or conference in order to make it to the championship game. There were no such things as wild cards. If you weren't first, for the purposes of the playoff hunt, you were last. However, if two teams were tied atop the division, then a one-game playoff would be held to determine the spot, since there were no tiebreakers. In this case, both the Patriots and the Bills found themselves atop the AFL East, so they were set to face off at War Memorial Stadium, where the winner would take on the San Diego Chargers in the 1963 AFL Championship. For Buffalo, this game was an absolute disaster, as when the final gun went off, the Patriots won in convincing fashion, taking it by a final score of 26-8. Boston led 10-0 at the end of one, led 16-0 at the halftime break, and forced the Bills to not only commit 9 penalties for 100 yards, but forced them to commit 6 turnovers, run for 7 yards on 12 carries, averaging an abysmal 0.58 yards per carry, and complete just 42% of their passes combined as a team. Outside of a 93-yard pass, nothing went right for Buffalo on this day, as the Bills were thoroughly outclassed and outmatched, and missed out on a spot in the championship game. Everything about this game for Buffalo was ugly with a capital U, as by defeating the Bills in this playoff game to advance to the 1963 AFL Championship, the Patriots etched their name in football history. And speaking of etching your name into football history, that's what this entire channel is about, as we post a new video every single day about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL, and in this case, its rival league, the AFL. So if you like that sort of stuff, then be sure to hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. Thanks in advance for your support as we try and hit 70,000 subscribers. You might be asking though, why do I bring that game up in particular? Why that playoff game from 1963? Well, because you can make the argument that the Buffalo Bills never should have had to have played that game in the first place. Remember what I said before. If there was a tie for first, there was a playoff game to get to the championship, but otherwise, first place would move on automatically. And you can make the argument that the Bills, at 7-6-1, never should have had to play in that game, and should have automatically advanced to the title game, and would have if it wasn't for a controversial call in one of their earlier games that denied them that coveted 8th win. Because during a 1963 game against the Kansas City Chiefs, let's just say that there was a call that seemed to change the entire complexion of the season. And if you think the call is controversial by itself, wait until you hear the referee's explanation for it afterwards, because I promise you, you will never see a referee lie like this in your life. Because this is the story behind the controversial call that changed the entire 1963 season, and the referee controversy that ensued as a result. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context to understand the importance of the game at hand, as well as how the game itself was going. It's September 22nd, 1963. It's week 3 of the AFL season, and we head to Buffalo for this battle between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Buffalo Bills. For the Bills, this game feels like a must-win of sorts. They enter the game with an 0-2 record after dropping games to the San Diego Chargers and the Oakland Raiders. So if you drop this game and fall to 0-3, let's just say that your odds of making it to the AFL Championship are incredibly slim. The league had only been around since 1960, but no team in AFL history had ever made it to the championship with 0 wins through their first 3 games. So if you're Buffalo, you really need to win this one to keep your season alive and have a chance to win the AFL East. It's not going to be easy on paper against the defending AFL champion, but it's something that, considering your abysmal starts of the season, has to be done, no questions asked. And so far for Buffalo, as you can tell from the highlights thus far, the game was going according to plan. Despite the fact that Buffalo entered this game as underdogs, They were playing some of their best football in quite some time, and by far, their best football of the season. Midway through the third quarter, and the Bills had a 3-possession lead, leading it by a score of 27-10, thanks in part to 2 touchdown runs by Jack Kemp. Defensively, they were playing lights out. Not only did Mike Stratton have a pick-6 earlier in the game, but Len Dawson got sacked 3 times, the Chiefs turned it over 3 times, and the Chiefs had just 49 rushing yards on 22 carries, averaging barely over 2 yards per carry. Considering the fact that Buffalo got smoked defensively the previous week against the Oakland Raiders, allowing 35 points, this was a surprising change of pace, and it looked for sure like the Bills were going to prevail. A 3-score lead with about 20 minutes to go? You can't possibly blow that one. You just can't, especially seeing as you were getting the ball back after forcing a punt. All you have to do is not do anything crazy on this punt return, and you'll be okay. As for what happens next,
it's in the bag. Just wait. Here's the discussion of the year. Is it a safety or isn't it a safety? The officials say it is.
Yeah, let's talk about this play. So the rule in 1963 in the American Football League is the same as the rule today in the National Football League. If you are in the field of play and you get tackled, and the tackle forces you into the end zone, then it is ruled back at the spot where the tackle was made. We know this today as forward progress. Back in 1963, it was the impetus, and we still see the terminology of impetus being used today when it comes to punts, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. However, if you run into the end zone on your own accord and are then tackled in the end zone, it is a safety, and the other team is awarded 2 points. Let's get the obvious out of the way. You can't be doing this. If you're return man Willie West, you just can't be doing this. It's crazy how West is a 2-time All-Star and would even go on to make it to the All-Star game during that 1963 season. But his defining moment in pro football, despite being a great player, was this idiotic punt return to run all the way backwards instead of just taking the yardage available to him. Which raises the question, where was Willie West tackled? Was he tackled in the end zone, or was he carried into the end zone? It is super close. It is extremely close. And seeing as there was no instant replay back in 1963, the call on the field is the call that stood. This was a safety. West didn't seem to think this was a safety whatsoever. As he said after the game, "I know I wasn't in the end zone. I looked down and still saw yard stripes." Head coach Lou Saban seemed to have doubted that this was actually a safety as well. As he said on the play afterwards, it might have been a terrible mistake on Willie West's part. The officials called it a safety, and it stands that way. And maybe this wouldn't be such a huge deal if this was the NFL. If it was a 27-12 game in the NFL, it's not the end of the world whatsoever for Buffalo. Yes, this stinks, but that's still a 3-score game back in 1963. But in the American Football League, they had the 2-point conversion. And this meant that 27-12 was a 2-score game, because you could score 8 points on a possession, not 7. Sure enough, the Chiefs would use this play as a confidence boost, and would score 2 touchdowns from Len Dawson and Chris Burford, tack on a 2-point conversion, and the game ended as a 27-27 tie game. So yeah, this safety was a big deal. Was it a blown call? Was it the correct call and just an idiotic mistake by Willie West? You be the judge of that. However, while that was definitely controversial, it wasn't as controversial as what the referee said on this play afterwards. Because folks, if you want to talk about a referee refusing to take accountability and refusing to do his job, this is that moment right here. The official for this game, and for this play you've been watching this entire time, was Walter Fitzgerald. He was the one that made the highly controversial call that may have changed the entire 1963 season, and possibly denied Buffalo a spot in the AFL Championship automatically. And after the game, Fitzgerald was asked about the safety that changed the game. As for what Fitzgerald had to say about it, he said, "There is a league rule against us reporting on anything concerning decisions made in the game." So, Fitzgerald wasn't going to comment on it. Don't ask him any questions. There was a gag rule in the AFL that officials could not say anything. If you wanted an explanation on something, I didn't know where you were supposed to get it or how you were supposed to get it, but the referees were not allowed to comment on the issue. Now you might be saying, well, what's the problem here? You said that Fitzgerald refused to take accountability and talk about the call, but he wasn't allowed to. It was written in his contract. It was a league-wide thing. You wouldn't fault someone for refusing to say anything when they have an NDA. And you wouldn't fault someone for refusing to say something when saying that thing would get them fired from their job. And it seemed like that's what Fitzgerald was going for here. Don't shoot the messenger, but I can't say anything about that play and why I called it. And that would be all swell and dandy if such a thing existed. Because when news of Fitzgerald comments made it to the league office in New York, AFL officials were perplexed. What the heck are you talking about? We don't have a gag rule. We've never had a gag rule. You are absolutely allowed to talk about the calls. In fact, you're actively encouraged to talk about the calls. Fitzgerald made up the fact that this rule existed, because this rule, simply put, does not exist. It would be like if a head coach was asked after a game why their best player wasn't on the field for the final play of the game. And he responded by saying that the league has a rule that in the interest of player safety, a player can't play 100% of all snaps on one side of the ball during a game. No such rule actually exists. So Fitzgerald just made this up about the play you've been watching ad nauseum this entire time. Was this a safety? Was this an incorrect call? Again, you be the judge of that. It's awfully close either way. But did Walter Fitzgerald make a mountain out of a molehill by saying something existed that very clearly did not? And did Walter Fitzgerald destroy all credibility he had as an official by lying about the situation and by throwing the league under the bus? You bet he did. Of course, the grand irony about what happened in the game between these two teams behind me right here is the fact that what Walter Fitzgerald did can be interpreted one of two ways. Either he lied and just didn't want to take responsibility for his call, or even funnier, number two, he genuinely didn't know that this was a thing. He had no idea that there was no such thing as a gag rule. The irony, of course, is that his literal job is to know the rule book, and he didn't know this rule whatsoever. Fitzgerald would referee for the rest of the AFL's existence and would ref professional football in the NFL once the merger happened until 1971. So he lasted a decade longer after this, or just about. How he did, considering everything that went down here, I have no clue, but that's the 1960s for you. Very, very bizarre, and not a whole lot made any sense whatsoever. Like I said, the Chiefs ended up tying the game afterwards by scoring the final 17 points of the contest, as you're able to tell right now, with the spark for the comeback being ignited by the safety that maybe was, or maybe wasn't. Regardless, here's a good piece of life advice for anyone. Don't lie. Lying is not good. In fact, lying is very bad, and you should probably not do it. If you're in a position to take accountability or accept responsibility, do so, and don't deflect the blame if it's in your hands, especially if you didn't do anything wrong in the first place, since again, it's not like the call was egregious, and it absolutely could have gone either way. And if your job is to know the literal rules, then by God, you better know the rules. Because if you don't, you're going to be scrutinized to hell and high water. Because in 1963, the only person that screwed up more than Willie West was the man who opened his mouth after the game. Be sure to like and subscribe if you have not done so already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And check out my other channels, JG8 for the history of college football, JG7 for the history of baseball, and JG9 News, where we talk about all things happening in the NFL. Join me every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, where we'll play live NFL trivia for cash prizes. And make sure to join me live, as we're on stream just about every single day. And thanks to all our Patreon members and our YouTube members for helping out the channel. See how you become a member and show your support financially in the description down below.